stuff.
Then I guess is the next day they go to work, they have another shit day, they come home, they drink the wine again.
Yeah, the problem is that.
Yeah. If you could isolate it and not cause the sort of addiction cycle, then in isolation, it could, yeah.
I mean, I really, the nuance on that is so important because people will literally come after me and say, I said alcohol is a health food. I'm not saying that. In the example that I just gave, where do we leave room for human connection? How do we get out of this drive, overproduction, stressed out, so stressed out I can't connect with people? Where is health in that?
Breath work?
Yeah, if they'll do breath, yeah, there's a lot of other things. You're right. There's a lot of other things. So I want it, but let's put it in this context because it needs to live in a scenario that we do. You go out with friends, you eat good food, you have a glass of wine, you're enjoying each other, you're enjoying life. Is that dangerous?
Would the world be a better place if alcohol didn't exist?
Well, I think a lot of people would say yes. I mean, people who have dealt with alcoholics would definitely say yes.
Because I feel like we would have just found a different way to connect. And, you know, this idea that alcohol helps us to connect is probably because of the way we've designed the world. You know, bars, restaurants, pubs, all those kinds of things. And I feel like if we'd never discovered the inventions, we'd just found another way. You go to other parts of the world where they don't really drink, they do kind of have another way. Like, I was in Bali, and they do these, like, ecstatic dances.
Yeah.
Where it's like, have you ever seen these things? It's daytime. They have the music blaring, and everyone is just going absolutely crazy. They're like dancing as if they're all absolutely hammered, and they're doing it in daytime. And then they're flipping one eye up and I go, absolutely never. I'm never doing it. My partner does it all the time. And I go, and I look at these people and they go, do you not realise that you look weird? And I'm saying that through the lens of the social construct I have that behaviour is not normal or acceptable.
Right.
You know what I mean? But it's literally like people are going wild in the daytime to music together in a room.
And they have to be feeling amazing.
They must feel amazing.
Yeah.
So connected, so free. Right. But it's just weird over here. I mean, ecstatic dancing is a thing over here. In fact, it happens upstairs in the studio.
Okay.
But it's not something...
That's oxytocin.
Of course, yeah.
So maybe we should frame all of this under what's going to give you oxytocin. We need to do more oxytocin-rich activities so that we can make sure we keep human connection up, because human connection is so incredibly important. And so if ecstatic dance is your thing, great. You know, again, to your point, like the glass of wine, every once in a while might put you in that mood to be able to connect in all of these ways. So that might be a tool, but not every day. So, but we have to bring back this idea, oxytocin is the most powerful hormone on the planet. So when we're sitting at home and we're isolating ourselves and we are in disconnection and we're pointing fingers and we're yelling at each other, like we're raising cortisol, we're not raising oxytocin. But if you bring oxytocin up, as soon as oxytocin comes in, cortisol goes down. One of my recommendations to menopausal women that aren't sleeping is start petting your dog. Like just pet your dog before you go to bed, because that's going to give you oxytocin. It's going to bring the cortisol down from the day, and it's going to put you in a more relaxed state so you can get yourself into bed. If you don't have a dog, you know, hug somebody. But if we have to look at oxytocin as a healing hormone. And what we're talking about is this end of the day. And what I think happens is we go produce, and then, okay, you know, now I'm done. And then we go and maybe pop on social media. And then we're like, oh my God, that person doesn't think like I think, or this person's saying something wrong, and we just keep amping up our cortisol. If we go back to you asking about my daily routine, I feel like the morning should be oxytocin filled. You can let your day be cortisol filled if that feels right to you. And then when you end the day, bring oxytocin back in. How are you going to do that is personal to you.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favour. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.
Look, Vicks inhaler.
We were talking before we started recording about what's on your mind and what's been bothering you. And so the floor is yours. What is front of mind for you, Dr. David?
What's front of mind for me is the idea that each of us has a number of different health futures. So you have. So in your future, I don't know, there could be cancer, there could be multiple sclerosis, or there could be many futures. What I'm interested in is how do I get you to pick a lifestyle that will get you the future you want? And I think that's very difficult in the world now to know what is the best lifestyle because you're given so much conflicting advice. And the particular focus for me in terms of picking health futures is around young people because they've got the longest time to make a difference, and it's getting harder and harder and harder to make good health choices in your lifestyle. It's really hard. I'd say it's a pandemic of poor metabolic health. Yesterday in clinic, I saw 2 people under the age of 25 who had poorly controlled diabetes, and one of them was too heavy for me actually.
Hi, Eleazar. I think the name of the game is Guess the Answer.
Completely new. So when I was a young doctor,
Hi.
starting off in practice,
Thank you for coming by.
1996. Wow, nice, a long time ago. Just north of Liverpool in practice, I'm still there now. Obesity was rare, and we didn't have a single case of type 2 diabetes in anybody under 55. Not a single case. It was quite unknown. And in fact, type 2 diabetes had a different name. We've had to change the name because of the epidemic. It used to be called maturity onset diabetes. That meant old people, right? Now we call it type 2 diabetes because we have to include so many young people. It's really, really serious because people are losing their life expectancy.
Hey, let's go to the finals.
We're all sleepwalking into a metabolic disaster, and the people paying the greatest price, in my opinion, are young people, and it's a scandal, and I'm hopping mad, really. I think we've started to normalise the dad bod, the big tummy and haha, without realising that maybe that isn't how you're supposed to be. So that's what's in my mind. Young people and their future, and they don't even know.
You say young people there,
Yeah.
because they've got the biggest opportunity to change the trajectory of their health future.
Yes.
What
The
else?
audience is listening that might be in their 50s now.
Oh.
Is this advice also applicable?
What should I number to remember? What else?
Government figures, UK government figures,
Hmm.
that for every year that you have poorly controlled
Is
type 2
it medical
diabetes,
number?
you're losing 100 days of life. That's about a third of a year, isn't it?
No. Emergency number?
Whatever age you are, if you have poorly controlled diabetes,
Important number to remember.
a third of all the people in the world with type 2
Plate
diabetes don't
number.
know they have it because they haven't taken
Please.
tests, so they don't know. What do you think kills people with type 2 diabetes?
Hello. Oh
Is
no.
it
Oh
some
no.
cardiovascular issue?
Yeah, well done. Well done. You see, you've not been to medical school, what are you doing on it? That, most doctors, that's what they'd say, because we know that a high blood sugar
It's door code.
damages your arteries.
Social
So it's a
Social
cumulative
Security.
over time. But what you may not know is that actually a rising cause of mortality for people with diabetes is cancer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So 8 forms of cancer are strongly associated with diabetes.
I want to just define that term diabetes because I think I went for a lot of my life assuming that diabetes was a disease that some people are born with. And because I didn't have it, I thought I don't need to worry about that.
That's really important. Yeah. So first of all, there's type 1 diabetes and type 2. But before I can explain
Yay. Thank
diabetes, I
you.
need to explain about insulin. This is absolutely key to our whole discussion. So I've already said high blood sugar.
Yes, it's a victory. Thank you.
In fact, there's work to show that a very high blood sugar damages the non-stick lining of your arteries. within 6 hours.
Nice.
Really quick. It's called the glycocalyx, the non-stick lining. and damage is occurring very quickly. So,
I'm going to ask you a really stupid question.
yeah,
When you say high blood sugar, I get high blood sugar when I eat lots of sugar.
okay. So, first of all, we're actually talking about glucose,
Yeah.
and sugar can mean table sugar or it could mean many different things, but we're actually talking about blood glucose,
Which comes from lots of foods.
which comes from many foods.
Carbohydrate heavy foods.
Yes, yes, it does. It does. So that's right. But you have the hormone insulin to defend you from poor dietary choices. So the question is, what does insulin do with the sugar you just ate? And here's the answer.
Yay, let's join Vienna.
Hormone insulin produced by a pancreas gland. It pushes the sugar and it pushes it out of the bloodstream inside cells where it can be used for energy for you to run around. But what if you take in more carbohydrate than you need to run around? Well, then that sugar is turned to fat inside cells because it's safer for you to turn that sugar into fat than it is to have it damaging your arteries. So I'm somebody with type 2 diabetes, so we can talk about that. I had a really heavy biscuit habit. I was senior partner of the practice and it's stressful, and I had patients used to bring me biscuits all the time as a gift because they want the doctor to be happy. So in the drawer on the top of my desk was packets and packets of biscuits. So I'm taking in more sugar and I didn't run around, and gradually my waist got bigger. And what was actually happening was, as I took in more sugar than I needed to run around, my insulin was working to get rid of that sugar. And it was giving me two things. One, a belly. So it might, and I thought it's just middle-aged spread, And the other was I didn't know, but my liver was filling with fat. And that
Nice.
is very common.
I like
So we
fat.
have,
Yeah,
it's
sorry.
a third of
Let's go.
everybody in the developed world has fatty liver.
I
Here we
don't
got
know how
awful
to
crops.
answer
Let's
that
talk
one.
about
Some
these. Great. So fatty liver, this is the healthy liver here. And you see the colour. Look at this one. It's yellow. It's the wrong colour. And it's because of fat. So in that case, like what's happened to me over years, my liver began to fill with fat.
What's that? Sometimes I never call myself smiling.
Yes. So I was taking in too much glucose. Insulin was doing its good job of taking it out of my bloodstream and forcing it inside cells in my belly, but unfortunately in my liver.
Okay.
And so there's a progressive laying down of fat in the liver. So if we look at actually some proper liver, so this is the, put on your seatbelts now because this is somebody's actual liver. So then that's the normal liver. But look at this, it's larger.
That's a real human liver.
Yes, these are human livers, and that's as it should be. But look at this liver, it's larger. And it's larger because there's so much fat in it. Now, the twist in the story is fatty liver interferes with the good work of insulin, a thing called insulin resistance, which means your insulin is no longer as powerful as it was. It's beginning to become difficult for you to deal with carbohydrate and sugar because your insulin isn't working as well. And the only way to deal with that is the next twist in the story. You have to start producing more insulin. Do you see? Because it doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
So your pancreas has to crank up the supply. We need more insulin. So now you have two things. You have insulin resistance. Your insulin isn't working as well. But at the same time, you're trying to produce more insulin in the pancreas. This bit's called the long silent scream from the liver. This is work by Professor Roy Taylor, a friend of mine at Newcastle University. And he pointed out that you've got fatty liver for about 2 years. You don't even know. You wouldn't know that your liver's gone fatty and yellow like that. But unfortunately, this is another twist. that is being laid down in the pancreas gland, the very gland that your life depends upon producing insulin. And your ability to produce enough insulin collapses. And at that point, you can't regulate blood sugar anymore. But upstream of that, you have a problem. You've got that, but you don't even know. You're talking about what's in our mind. Why are we waiting until you actually have all the problems of type 2 diabetes? So, since 2013, I've got hundreds of patients and I'm monitoring the baseline and latest follow-up. So, what happens to them? It's really important. And now I have a huge data set that I can interrogate and answer questions. So, number one question, let's think about pre-diabetes. So, this is in the long silent screen. Well, I can tell you that the people with pre-diabetes in my practice north of Liverpool, 93% of them will get a completely normal blood sugar if they go low carb. 93% resolution, and that will last for years because I checked. Okay. How about we wait for the 10 years and until Stephen, you've got type 2 diabetes and then you've got low carb. At that point, if I can get you early, I've got a 73% chance of you having a normal blood sugar. Let's wait another few years because you don't want to give up bread and you don't want to give up chips and pizza. Fair enough, I'll wait. But if we wait 5 years, you only stand a 50% chance. So do you see, it goes 93, over 70%, 50%. So the chances of me not needing drugs and be able to do a good job for you are diminishing. So really, it's a stitch in time. Mm-hmm. And so much of this, you don't even know. You don't even know what's going on.
One of the things that shocks me is how little we know about what's in our food.
Yes.
Because I think we all know that like biscuits are a food that has a high glycemic index, which is a term that I've learned from this podcast.
Yes.
Means
some carbohydrates and others. And then, so that's the glycemic index. What that is doing is comparing different carbohydrates with pure glucose.
So you hi everyone.
It's 100, and then other sugars come further down. But there's something better than the glycemic index, and that's called the glycemic load. The glycemic load takes portions of food and predicts how will that portion of food actually affect your blood sugar.
And am I right in thinking the glycemic load would factor in the amount of nutrients in the food?
Exactly.
So like protein, fiber.
Yeah.
No.
If you took watermelon, well, it's mainly
Want to
water.
show me?
So you have to factor in
searching.
quite a lot of watermelon to equal a chocolate bar.
Mm-hmm.
So the density, you're looking at the density of sugar in it as well.
Okay.
So that's why the glycemic load is better.
Was there a moment in your career where you started to question what you had been told?
Yeah.
Plan or get away with a go-go today. All your travel needs in one place. See now.
One of the things that I've really enjoyed with first aid that have learned computers is it's a developer in the box. And it really has all the tools that a human has, and it can go and work like a human does. Not only in writing software.
Yeah. So you start as a young doctor. I wanted to be part of a small community and stay there and make a difference. And then comes the sad bit, really. So for the first 25 years, I was trying to do guidelines. I was trying to be a good doctor. But what I noticed two things. Number one, I noticed what I've already said to you, that the health of the population I cared for was deteriorating. It wasn't getting better. So if I'm the doctor in charge of the practice looking after these people, and health is degrading, am I not responsible? And where is all this difference I was hoping to make? It just wasn't coming in. At the same time, but always in my heart, felt that prescribing lots of drugs felt a bit wrong. It felt like a mini failure because How is somebody well if they're taking 6 tablets a day?
Was there one particular patient that you met?
There were two things happened, both to do with very powerful women. The first powerful woman was a lady I'd known for over 10 years. She and her husband had cared for them both. They both had poorly controlled diabetes and they were both very heavy. At the time, I could monitor how compliant my patients were with their medication. And if I'm to be truthful, in part, that was how I was paid. So part of my payment was to do with other patients having, in this case, metformin, the most commonly used drug for type 2 diabetes.
Part of your payment?
Yeah, how would you know? Because you're supposed to, the government approve of the fact that we give drugs that are needed for type 2 diabetes. So that you get such a quota where it's regarded as good practice that such a certain percentage of your patients will be on metformin. What? Yeah, it's true.
So is it fair to say that you were somewhat incentivized to give people metformin?
Yes, that would be true. But I think we should also be fair to say that the body of evidence at the time would say that it's good practice to give metformin to people with type 2 diabetes, and conversely, poor practice not to use metformin, but we'll develop that. So the backdrop is we're monitoring the patients who stop taking their metformin, because that is, number one, poor practice, and number two, actually costly. So I wrote to the person, dear Mr. So-and-so, I'm concerned that you don't seem to be taking your metformin. Please make an appointment with me at your earliest convenience. Very British, very polite. Anyway, nothing prepared me for what was going to happen. It's changed my entire life on that point. So the lady, but let's call her Mrs. Jones, that wasn't her name, she marches in and she said to me, you think you're going to tell me off, don't you, Dr. Unwin? Well, I've got news for you. I'm going to tell you off. I was scared, like, what's going on? She'd never been nice before. She was a polite person. Anyway, she went on to explain. She said, when you do my blood tests, you'll find that my blood glucose is completely normal, despite not taking your metformin. And she said, I'm wondering if you're actually qualified, because in the last 10 years, did you ever once tell me that bread was sugar? That breakfast cereals were sugar? I had to learn online that bread is sugar, that rice is sugar, that breakfast cereals are sugar.
Caviar,
But
garlic.
when I cut those things, I don't put metformin. And she made it work.
No.
She said, this is schoolboy biology. You should have learned that when you were 16. I was dead scared because, you know, complaints as a GP, it's really bad. They go on for years and years. But mainly I was scared because every word she said was true. And one thing I had learned about when you're a medical doctor is you've got to listen to people properly. If they're complaining, don't deny it. Don't defend yourself. Take it. So I said, okay, I want to learn what you know, if this is true, will you meet me again, do the blood test? So we did the blood test, it was true. It was the first case of drug-free type 2 diabetes I'd ever seen. I'd never seen a single case in 25 years where people came off medication. I was fascinated because she'd done it like a miracle. But there was another detail I just share with you. She was one of 40,000 people online learning from each other how to do it. And when I wrote, they were being rubbish by the healthcare professionals. So people like me were telling them you'll die. What you're doing is dangerous. And I was ashamed, really ashamed. And it's complete coincidence. But in the same month, we have to introduce my wife, Jen. Is there a photo? Come on, let's see Jen. This is Jen. Oh, She's probably the cleverest woman in the world. She's so clever. I love that woman. So Jen, so her background, she is a clinical health psychologist, and she specializes, she's fascinated by the role of hope in disease and the difference it can make. She spent her life researching the difference that hope makes to clinical outcomes. So it just so happened that she was in a supermarket and she saw a discounted diet book. That's the book. Escape the Dollar Tree with Dr. John Griffin. Yeah, Dr. John Griffin. What a lovely guy. So Jen bought that book. She was around the time I'm telling her about this patient. So she said, you have to read this book about the low carbohydrate approach to insulin resistance, to type 2 diabetes. And in the book, everything that my patient had told me was there, but it was done in a medical way, and I understood. She said, David, why are you sort of failing? Why don't you do one thing before you retire? Why can't you do a cheerful, something you really believe in? Why don't you have a go at this low carb yourself? Yeah, she said, why don't you and me go on this diet, see if some patients would volunteer and do business? And I mentioned it to partners, and they said no. These are other doctors. Yeah, so I'm a senior partner. I'm supposedly the boss. But at the time, low carb was not respectable, and they didn't like it. And they said, we don't want you to do this. And partly because they said, well, is that a good use of the practice? Because if you're doing this, David, maybe you're not treating chest infections or other things, and there's pressure on the health service. So they felt it was a bit self-indulgent. Go back to my wife and said, the partner's saying no. And she said, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're both going to work for free, and we'll do it. Why don't we do this in our own time, in the evening, when the practice has no resources? So that's exactly what we do. We found 18 volunteers who were interested in the patient, and then Jen and I, so that was 20 of us, started meeting every Monday night, talking about low carb, learning how do you cook stuff, how do you do it. We did it together. And one of the nurses was so excited. Heather is her name. Let's give her, thumbs up to Heather. Heather said, I'll work for free. I'll help you. I love to do this. I want to believe in what I do. And then the magic begins. The results, I couldn't believe it. I could not, I'd never seen anything like it. The first thing I saw was the liver function program. Because I'm doing it, because I know I'm doing something weird. I'm doing something that I would be criticised for. So if you're going to do a real thing, you need to measure stuff. You can't do those things. So you can't just experiment to know what am I doing harm.
If you love the Durham CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favour. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.
We're gonna work.
Insulin resistance. Insulin's having a harder time keeping the blood glucose levels in check. Anytime inflammation is up, insulin resistance will be up as well. Even in things like autoimmune diseases, there are reports in humans that document the degree to which someone has, say, active rheumatoid arthritis. Their joints are aching, and because of an autoimmune attacking the joints. They will note on some days, like every autoimmune disease, there is an ebb and a flow. Some days it's good, some days it's bad. And on the bad days, if you measure their insulin resistance, it is absolutely locked with the degree to which their immune system is turned off or higher or lower. So inflammation is another cause. And then the last one of the fast lane of insulin resistance is too much insulin itself. Now, the astute listener will realize the kind of circular thing I just presented by invoking high insulin as a cause of insulin resistance, because they will also think, but wait a minute, Ben, you just said that high insulin is also a consequence of insulin resistance. That, back to the bouncer knocking on the door of the muscle cell, if one bouncer wasn't enough, or one molecule of insulin wasn't enough, the body will say, okay, well, let's send 10 molecules of insulin. So high insulin is both a consequence of insulin resistance, but it's also a cause. And this is reflective of a fundamental principle in all of biology, that if there is too much of a stimulus, a cell, if it's capable, will try to become resistant to that stimulus. This would be like a funny analogy of in the Bickman home. My darling wife is home with the children. That is what she wants to do. She's full-time mom. When I'm home, and I try to be home as much as I can, it's funny for me to note the difference in how quickly we each respond to our children. I will hear my child saying, Mom, 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 and she's not responding. Mom has heard this for so much that she's become kind of selectively deaf to when my children are demanding her attention. I'm not as around my children quite as much because I'm working during the day. And so when I hear that, it's a very fresh signal to me. I've not heard it so much that I've become deaf to it. And so I will respond even though I'm in the other room, because I'm so much more sensitive to the clamoring for attention. This is like the body in response to insulin. If there is always insulin, it's always going up, the body will start to say, the muscle cell will start to say, boy, insulin, you are knocking on my door all the time. This is getting old. I'm not responding anymore. I'm not going to listen as much as I was before. So in that sense, insulin, too much insulin becomes a cause of insulin resistance. And back to what I said earlier, I could take you into the lab, start infusing you with just a little drip of your insulin, and over just a few hours, you would become demonstrably less sensitive to it than you were before we started. But again, as I take that away, give your body a few hours and it's back to normal. In every one of those instances, it's a fast onset and it's also a fast solution if we can take it away.
If we can take it away, but if we can't take it away, does it become sort of chronic?
Yeah, so that especially, all of these can contribute to a more lingering insulin resistance, but especially insulin, where I focus on that one the most because of not only its relevance to the slow lane, but also just how present it is, where 70% of all calories globally are carbohydrates. And now, perhaps with the best of intentions, our experts are telling us that we should be eating 6 times a day. And so we wake up in the morning, insulin has finally been coming down while we've been fasting overnight. Insulin gets to take a little bit of a break. We're fasting. Then we break that fast by eating breakfast. And in the UK, as it is in the US, by and large, this is going to be a very starchy, sugary breakfast. It's toast with some jam, or it's cereal, or it's bagels. That is almost pure glucose. And so what do? We wake up, we eat breakfast, we spike levels, and insulin has to come up. Insulin will take longer to come down than the blood sugar will. It will wait in the blood to make sure that all the blood sugar has gone back to normal. So depending on how much carbohydrate we ate for breakfast, it could take our insulin levels 3 or even 4 hours to come back down to normal. Long before it's had a chance to come back down to normal, we've had a mid-morning snack, of course. We need to go get a sugary coffee and another bagel or something. And so after just a couple hours, we do it again. And once again, before insulin has had a chance to come back down, we have a starchy, carbohydrate-heavy lunch, then an afternoon, and a carbohydrate dinner. And then, of course, we have to have an evening snack before we go to bed. So the actual is spending every waking moment. That's the signal to really never give themselves. But one consequence of that I mentioned, which is that it directly causes insulin resistance. But when insulin is high,
At 50, your body ages faster inside.
Looking cute does not have to come with suffering, and luxury does not have to come with blisters. I think we all suffered for the look before. I know that I have, but beauty does not have to be pain. Thanks to Babaya, the sponsor of today's video, you can effortlessly add to your look with a cute pair of comfortable and sustainable shoes. Babaya is eco-friendly. They primarily use recycled plastic bottles to create their shoes, offering fashion with a mission. They're also very focused on making quality, long-lasting footwear that you can wear day after day and not have to worry about constantly replacing. Also, most of their shoes are machine washable, so if you get them dirty, no worries. They're meant to handle daily use, so you don't have to treat them like they're fragile. My Margot Mary Jane 3.0s are comfortable, cute, and I'm very excited to wear them.
It starts to have a signal on the fat cell. And that then brings us to the slow insulin resistance, where you have something happening in the fat tissue that begins to set the stage for insulin resistance in the entire body. And it takes longer to settle in, it takes also longer to go away. That's what I call this one slow insulin resistance. Now, in the case of insulin, most people, so the key with I'll explain this first. So the most relevant feature of fat tissue contributing to insulin resistance is the size of each fat cell. When we typically think of fat, we would maybe say, okay, Steve has, I'll do this in kilos for the UK audience. Steve has 10 kilos of fat in your entire body. That's probably too much. Ben has 20 kilos. And yet, it's possible that I'm healthier metabolically than you. And that's because it's not the mass of fat that matters most, it's the size of the fat cell. This is why women, despite universally being fatter than male counterparts, are healthier with regards to insulin resistance to every single metabolic problem. It's because women, as a result of her particular sex hormones, have more fat cells, but they're smaller. So she has more fat, but smaller fat cells. And small fat cells are healthy, insulin sensitive, anti-inflammatory. But the bigger the fat cell gets, the more it initiates a cascade of events or a series of events that creates insulin resistance.
And am I right in thinking we have the same amount of fat cells for our whole life?
That's a really, really safe assumption for most people. Yeah, for most people, the fat cell, sometimes students will hear that fat cells are immortal. That is not true. But they're long-lived. Fat cells will live about 10 years. And so typically, by the time, if you look at a newborn, during infancy, childhood, and puberty, the number of fat cells is going up, 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 up. Once they finish puberty, so mid to late teens for a young woman, late teens or even early 20s for a young man, usually at that point, the number of fat cells they have is going to be very steady.
This is something people don't really understand, and I actually discovered from doing this podcast and speaking to some experts about this, that pretty much, especially as an adult, have this same amount of fat cells, really regardless of what we eat.
Yes.
It's actually just the fat cells we have shrinking or expanding.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Now, there are differences.
By the way, it makes liposuction a pretty fucking bad idea.
In fact, it makes things worse. Please, let's make sure we come back to that.
Okay, wait, don't mind.
Because it really becomes, the person ends up, their vanity ends up really ruining their future molecule. But there are differences across ethnicity. Like, this is a little oversimplified, but not much. On one end, you'd have Caucasians, kind of Northern European Caucasians. On the other one end, you have East Asians, like Chinese, Japanese, Korean, East Asians. And then if you look at that same spectrum of people making fat cells through their life, an East Asian will be making fat cells and then stop right about here. So very few fat cells, relatively speaking, across all the ethnicities, well, very few fat cells. A Caucasian on the other end of the spectrum, they went way higher. And so this guy, let's say American Ben versus Chinese Ben, overly simplified. But here we go. So much of fat mass isn't the number of fat cells, even though American Ben has more, it's the size of the fat cell. So I could feed the same percent body fat, really, as Chinese Ben, but that would just be because my fat cells were just that much smaller. But this is the problem. If you have, let's say, American Ben and Chinese Ben both gained 10 kilos of pure fat over the next 10 years, very easily. Often. Caucasian Ben just doesn't look as good in his speedo. which is a pasty Caucasian. He's not going to look particularly good in that Speedo anyway. But I just am bulging a little more than I was before. But otherwise, I'm healthy. Blood pressure's fine. Blood sugar's fine. Everything's normal. Put that same 10 kilos of fat on Chinese Ben, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, infertility. And that is because Chinese Ben had fewer fat cells to start with. And so those fat cells, as the body was told to store fat, those fats were getting much sooner. And the fat cell promotes insulin resistance very, very readily. And so that logically moves into the question of, well, what makes fat cells grow? And it is two essential variables. But we only ever look at calories. And yet, if you take a person with type 1 diabetes and say, I want you to eat 10,000 calories, but don't give yourself your insulin injection, they cannot gain weight. It is literally impossible for the type 1 diabetic to get fat if they are skipping their insulin injections. In fact, this is so known that if you take, let's imagine a young woman who would maybe have more pressure to be thin than her male counterpart, although it's happening more in males too. Imagine a young girl who gets diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 13 or 14. Very impressionable time. She's very worried about how she looks and how thin she is. She learns that, wait a minute, I can eat whatever I want, and all I have to do is not inject my insulin, and I'll be as skinny as I want. And it works. It works so well that it's actually a formal eating disorder called diabulimia. So the fact that this exists is absolute proof that the growing and the shrinking of the fat cell is more complicated as calories being high or low. Because like I said earlier, when I talked about hormones are a way for the very tissues of the body to know what it ought to do with energy. And so a fat cell will have energy all around it. And if it doesn't have insulin to tell it what to do, it won't do anything. Or maybe to make this more direct, back home in my lab, my students are growing fat cells in petri dishes. These fat cells are swimming in a little sea of calories, lots of glucose, lots of fats, and yet they stay really small until we add insulin. The moment we add insulin into that little petri dish, if we check those cells 4 hours later, they're immediately fatter. If we check them 4 hours later, they're fatter still. Now they know what to do with the energy. So with slow insulin resistance, it develops when fat cells get really, really big. It's like because they have to tell insulin, you continue, you are telling me to keep growing. I can't keep growing. I'm so big that I'm going to pop. I mean, literally, fat cell can get so big. It's like a water balloon that a non-little boy has sort of filled and it's about to burst. The fat cell doesn't want to burst. And so it tells insulin, you are trying to make me grow. You can grow. I can't listen anymore. I'm becoming insulin resistant to stop growing.
So insulin makes you fat.
Oh, very much. Now, if you, so a moment ago I said that the big fat cell is two variables. You must have both. You must have both a signal to tell the fat cell to get big, which is insulin. There's no other signal that can be. You can, in a human, just simply take away the insulin, like type 1 diabetes. It doesn't matter any other hormone in the body. It does not matter. They cannot get fat. They can eat 1,000, they can eat 10,000 calories of chocolate cake. They cannot get fat. They can't hold on to that. If there's no insulin to tell the fat cell to hold on to it or get big, it has to shrink. Breaking down automatic fat. So the insulin signal is necessary to tell the fat cell what to do. But the fat cell will say, okay, insulin, you're high, you're telling me to grow, but what am I going to grow with? That's where the calories come in. Now the fat cell will say, hey, fats and glucose in the blood, insulin has told me to get big, and so I need to pull you in to help me grow. You're going to give me the bulk. And if you have one without the other, it is death.
So if I'm eating 2,000 calories and I have a different insulin sensitivity to you, so both eat 2,000 calories and I'm insulin resistant, doesn't that mean that
You'll store more fat.
Okay.
Yeah. So your body would partly depend on. There are people where if all of your fat cells had reached its maximum point, then you're done. You're not going to gain more fat. You're just going to become more and more and more insulin resistant.
Okay, fine.
So you have to start limiting yourself. But there are studies in humans to show that if you give humans isocaloric meals, so the exact same number of calories, but they in the same amount of protein, but you differ those meals based on the amount of carbs to the amount of fat. So let's do meals exact same calories, in one meal, same calories in one meal. One version of this is conventional way of eating with lower fat, higher carb. Same number of calories, but it's lower carb, higher fat. This lower carb, higher fat version will have a lower insulin response, and they will store less fat from that meal. And some would say, well, where do the calories go? You actually can't destroy energy. The metabolic rate will go up. So when the insulin is low, if you have someone going a full day eating the same number of calories but lower carb calories, their metabolic rate will be almost 300 calories higher.
When metabolic rate is
Yeah, that's the total amount of energy that it just costs you and I to just live.
okay,
So we're going through the day. But that's a significant amount. Like if you and I were to go exercise and say, let's go burn calories, we gotta be on the stair step for an hour or something. So it's 300 calories. But at the same time, if your insulin is low, you're burning so much fat that you start making ketones. And I don't intend to go on that topic quite yet. But suffice it to say, every molecule of a ketone has a caloric load roughly similar to glucose. And one of the and what the body, when it starts making a lot of ketones, it starts eliminating the ketones. So every time someone is breathing out ketones, they're literally breathing out calories. Or they're urinating, and they're urinating out ketones. They have higher ketones in their blood. They're urinating out calories because ketones have energy. And so this is the way that if insulin is low, it becomes impossible for the body to hold on to its energy. It is so determined to spend energy that it will both increase metabolic rate and it will make the energy, the calories, be wasted in the breath and in the urine and in the form of ketones, because ketones have calories. Ketones are energy. Now we're dumping them out in the universe.
it's worth, before we talk about how to keep my insulin levels low so I can benefit from health benefits we talked about, it's probably also worth just spending a little bit of time to understand the evolutionary basis of insulin resistance.
There are some theories that are very interesting that attempts to explain why is it that we became so fantastically different from, let's say, our closest animal relatives, other primates like chimpanzees or apes. What was the difference that had us become so different than them? One of the leading theories is a theory called the expensive tissue hypothesis. It actually does have something to do with ketones. In the expensive tissue hypothesis, as the theory goes, our earlier ancestors deviated in this kind of animal family line because we started eating more meat. We started eating food that was so nutritious, so nutrient dense, so loaded with good calories and all of the fats and proteins that we need, that it allowed two very distinct changes to occur in us compared to other primates. One, our intestines became significantly shorter. So if you compare the human digestive tract to any other primate animal, if we are a primate, then if you look at the intestines, they're fantastically different, particularly the large intestine or the colon, because our ancestors, as the theory goes, began eating meat. We didn't need the colon as much because the colon is a place for food to ferment. And so if you're eating a lot of plant matter, like other primates do, you need a much, much larger colon. So we started eating food that was so nutrient dense, our colon shrunk considerably. We didn't need to waste energy on a big, busy colon. At the same time, as we were eating food that was so nutrient dense and so loaded with good fat, it allowed us to have more time to be curious and explore. And so at the same time, our intestines were shrinking because we didn't need them to be so big. Our brain was growing. And it's because of so much nutrition, including ketones. So ketones are an extraordinary fuel for the brain. In fact, one of the reasons why a baby that is born premature will be more likely to have learning disorders later in life is because premature baby didn't have time to get very fat. And fat baby is healthy baby. And fat baby gets into ketosis. Let's say you and I were to fast straight for 2 days. If you took a 6-month-old baby, that baby would be in a deeper state of ketosis in 2 hours than you and I would be in 2 days. Because the baby is burning so much of its beautiful chunky fat. And the more the body burns fat, the more it makes ketones. And the tissue of the body that appears to benefit the most in response to ketones is the brain. The brain, the moment ketones hit the blood stream, the brain immediately starts taking in ketones for a few. Very often, I have students who've had a professor, perhaps with the best of intentions, but ignorant nonetheless, tell the student that the brain, the main fuel for the brain is glucose, that the brain prefers glucose. And I show them just 1 or 2 papers to prove that wrong immediately. And it is reflected in this idea, which, if to use some convenient UK units, if blood glucose is 5 millimolar, that's a concentration, a way of measuring an amount of something. Blood glucose may be 5 millimolar, or 80 milligrams per deciliter for the American audience. That would be a normal glucose. And if you and I were to fast for 24 or so hours, we may get up to about 1 millimolar of ketones. And yet, even then, the brain has already switched to get the majority of its energy from the ketone. And so don't tell me that in this dynamic, the brain prefers this one, because this one's 5 times higher than this one. And even in that scenario, the brain is already getting more than half of its energy from the ketone. So all of this is my long way of saying, when we look at the principles of evolution, one of the leading theories is this idea that we began eating essentially a meat-heavy diet that, again, is so nutritious that it allowed our brains to grow. Maybe one final point on this, although it is a bit of a barbed comment, people may find this somewhat amusing or disappointing and frustrating. The title of a book just published, which is that vegetarian or brains. This is seen in humans, that the less a human eats meat, then the smaller the brain becomes. The brain is so dependent on the nutrient density that comes from animal source foods that it will suffer when it doesn't get them.
Interesting. That's controversial.
It is, you can cut it. But it really is, it's a real thing. And why does depression go up so much when people stop eating animal source foods? It's because you are depriving the brain of it.
What is it exactly you're depriving the brain of in that situation?
Yeah. So at least, among other things, at least it would be the essential omega-3 fats. So there are 3 omega-3s, and humans can only get 1 from plants, but it's one that the humans don't use. We need the other 2, and they only come from animal source foods.
And you could supplement.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, you can, but so the solution in that regard is the vegan must be educated enough to know what they're deficient in, and then wealthy enough to afford the supplements to make up for it.
So is that the only evolutionary sort of hypothesis towards why we developed this insulin resistance?
Oh yeah, in fact, it's funny that you bring the question up again, because I realized I didn't quite answer it that way. So insulin resistance, why would it exist at all? It would probably be a way for the body to know when it was needed to hold on to energy a little better. So now, I say that now, and someone would think, well, but why would I want to hold on to energy in a way where it's causing hypertension and Alzheimer's disease and increasing the risk of heart disease? Not all versions of insulin resistance are negative. So there is all the insulin resistance that I've been talking about is pathological insulin resistance or harmful insulin resistance. Insulin resistance that serves no good purpose and it's making us sick. However, there is insulin resistance in human development, which is physiological or helpful. It's supposed to happen. And that is the 2 P's of physiological insulin resistance: puberty and pregnancy. Because in both of those instances, as we outlined earlier, when the body's insulin resistant, insulin is high. That's not always bad, because insulin wants things to grow. It is like a fertilizer in the body. Now, sometimes it's misplaced and results in problems like increasing the risk of cancer, for example. But in other instances, if you have a young child, it's telling the body to store more energy, to build up tissues, including muscle and bone. But also including fat.
So in pregnancy, insulin's playing a role in growing
It sure is.
the breasts.
Yeah, so in a woman, after she's finished puberty, the only other time of growth she'll ever have will be pregnancy. And so those are the two instances where the body has become insulin resistant to take advantage of the heightened scenario where it can grow.
Because the woman's body needs to.
Oh, goodness, yeah. Yeah, so her body not only needs to grow tissue mass, like the uterus has to get much bigger, she has to grow a placenta. She also needs to become a little insulin resistant to give a little more glucose to her baby, because she is, after all, now living for two people. And so as her body becomes insulin resistant, it actually facilitates the growth of the baby a little more rapidly. But as you noted, it helps her store more fat, and progesterone is an hormone that even accelerates that process. But basically, it's her body's way of saying, hey, I am committing to growing another human, and it's going to be metabolically very demanding. And so I'm going to have as much extra fat or as much extra energy as I can in order to ensure that if there's any sort of scarcity in food that happens during the course of the pregnancy, I'll have enough energy to get through it all. And then maybe I'll even have enough to continue to feed the baby with lactation after the baby's born.
What is gestational diabetes?
Yeah, it's a great question. Gestational diabetes is essentially type 2 diabetes of pregnancy. So it's a perfectly timed question, because if you look at the average woman who is very healthy, very insulin sensitive at the beginning of her pregnancy, so glucose is normal and insulin is normal. Over the course of her pregnancy, she stays normal, healthy pregnant woman, which is to say she has physiological insulin resistance. She doesn't get diagnosed with gestational diabetes, though, which means her glucose is normal. But to keep her glucose normal, because she is insulin resistant, but for a purpose to help her body grow, her insulin levels are high, and the glucose is still in the normal range. And then in some women, especially if she has a family history of type 2 diabetes, the insulin resistance goes too far. Now, she has high insulin, all pregnant women, but she's able to keep her glucose level in check.
So if I'm eating loads of sugar throughout pregnancy,
that will compound the problem. Absolutely. So then she will go from normal insulin resistance to pregnancy into resistance diabetes. So really, like type 2 diabetes, a microcosm of it, a mini version that was really instigated or initiated because of the pregnancy, combined with a genetic condition, combined with her immune response.
does that impact the future baby?
Oh, for sure it does. Yeah. So think about, it's almost like the baby is developed a little hyperglycemic, hyperinsulinemic environment. So the baby gets hardwired to want to continue to exist in a state of high insulin and high glucose after the baby is born. And so yes, the offspring of mothers who have gestational diabetes are significantly more likely to gain weight and be chubbier or fatter than their counterparts, and to later develop type 2 diabetes. Yeah. A resounding yes.
I know you looked at these infants with a 42% higher chance to be obese and metabolic complications in teenage years and beyond.
Yes. I mean, it's significant. And I say that with all of the sympathy I can for the mother who may be struggling with this. But it is certainly a motivation for mom to just be mindful of what you're eating.
One of the things that I saw the other day on social media, which I wanted to ask you about, was this. There was someone online that posted this photo, and they said, well, it's graph, and they said, we need to figure out what's going on here. And this is the graph I'll put on screen for you as well, in the comment section below. It essentially shows that over the last, let's say, 20 years, there's been a really significant rise in cancer amongst women, but when we look at cancer amongst men, it's pretty flat. This is cancer incidence by age and gender up to 49 years old. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on why this is happening.
Yeah. A few thoughts come to mind. Whenever I see these kinds of reports, I always make sure I look firstly at what they actually measure. So just to set the stage, this is the number of women who have been diagnosed with not dying from cancer that's going up. So one simple explanation, although perhaps the most disappointing, could be that more women are going into testing younger, and so we're just seeing kind of artifact of what they were just going in sooner and maybe detecting the problem they wouldn't have otherwise detected, for 10 which is a good thing. We want to answer as soon as possible. So that's the boring answer. But it could be a reflection of more meaning for ultrasounds or MRIs or mammary scans, whereas men don't for anything, which is why we die more from everything, possibly. But to give a more exciting answer, this is very, very likely almost entirely driven by breast cancer. Breast cancer is the main cancer for women by far. And so if I had to guess, I bet almost all of this increase in cancer incidence is because of breast cancer. Why might that be going up? I would suggest there's probably a couple instances. One, although people might not appreciate this, is that one of the best ways for a woman to reduce her risk of breast cancer is actually having babies. It's very well known, very well documented that if a woman has babies and breastfeeds, her risk of breast cancer goes down. So, in fact, it's very meaningful. I actually don't know the reasons for it. It could be the changes in estrogens during lactation phase.
I've just done a quick search here. So I put a picture of that graph into AI and asked it the same question. And it's pretty much what you say. So there's a rise in breast cancer disease according to Cancer Research UK. The one that came from is obesity trends.
Oh, yeah. Well, I promised I was going to talk about that.
Oh,
I wouldn't use that.
yeah.
No problem.
And then the other one was late childbearing.
That's what I'm saying.
Which what you're saying.
Yeah, so as childbirth rates are going down, it does increase the risk of breast cancer. Now, I'm a cell biologist, right? I like to understand the mechanism. And so, as much as I invoke perhaps lower rates of childbirth in women, I don't know the mechanisms, so I'm sort of loath to describe it. The mechanisms I'm very familiar with are the metabolic, which is if you take breast tissue that is tumor tissue and compare it to, like if you take a breast tumor and compare it to the normal tissue right next to it that it would have shared its origins with, the cancer from the breast will have 7 times more insulin receptors than the normal breast tissue. So the idea of this tracking quite nicely with obesity rates going up over the past 20 years, I wouldn't say that it's the obesity per se, but I would say it's the entire metabolic milieu, which is the insulin resistance. That as much as the high insulin is growing fat cells, that high insulin is also accelerating the growth of tumor cells because again, one of the main mutations in breast cancer is a 7-fold, so 7 times increase in the number of insulin receptors. And insulin wants to tell things to grow. So it's no surprise that almost every tumor that's ever been measured for having insulin receptors will have a lot more. It's basically telling its neighboring cells, insulin's going to come by and it's going to tell us all to grow. I want to grow more than you. And that's what cancer is. Cancer is growth, unregulated growth. Insulin tells things to grow. So the connection between obesity with the rising incidence of breast cancer is very, very likely a consequence of the rising incidence of insulin resistance.
As you guys know, Whoop is one of my sponsors. It's also a company that I have invested in. It's one that you guys ask me about a lot. The biggest question I get asked is why use Whoop over other wearable technology options? And there is a bunch of reasons, but I think it really comes down to the most overlooked yet crucial feature. Its non-invasive nature. When everything in life seems to be competing for my attention, I turn to Whoop because it doesn't have a screen. And Will Ahmed, the CEO who came on this podcast, told me the reason that there's no screen. Because screens equal distraction. So when I'm in meetings or I'm at the gym, my Whoop doesn't demand my attention. It's there in the background, constantly pulling data and insights from my body that are ready for when I need them. If you've been thinking about joining Whoop, you can head to join.whoop.com/CEO and try Whoop for 30 days, risk-free and 0 commitment. That's join.whoop.com/CEO. Let me know how you get on. You know, one of the big subjects you touched on at the start was Alzheimer's and dementia.
Yes.
And I have heard several people on this podcast tell me that think of Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
Worldwide, there is a new case of dementia every 3.2 seconds. It seems like, I don't know if this is true, is Alzheimer's and dementia on the rise?
Oh, yes. Yeah, it is. In fact, it went from not being even on the radar to being a top 10 killer. Now, it's interesting how people even die from Alzheimer's disease. It's a very kind of vague death. But yeah, Alzheimer's disease is one of the top 10 diseases now, certainly in the West. And I would argue it's because it has a metabolic origin. You know, one of the interesting things about Alzheimer's disease is we have spent billions of dollars on Alzheimer's research trying to identify the plaque. So just to set the stage here so that people listening can appreciate this paradigm shift that's occurred in Alzheimer's research. Originally, and even in many people still, people thought that Alzheimer's disease is the result of these plaques accumulating in the brain. These kind of little proteinaceous, little thick things that are preventing neurons from sending the signals throughout the brain for the brain to think and have normal cognition. And yet there are those of us, and I'm proud to say I have long been one of them, who has said that the plaque-based theory doesn't make sense. We have had drugs that have been available for human use that have effectively reduced plaques in the brain and yet did nothing to improve cognition. So that is an immediate challenge of the plaque-based theory of Alzheimer's. Even further, we look at confirmed Alzheimer's disease at the time of death and look at the brain of someone who died without any evidence of any cognitive decline or any compromised thinking whatsoever. And you would be just as likely to find plaques in both brains. So whether the brain had Alzheimer's disease or not, you would still see plaques in the brain. So the whole idea that plaques mattered has long been controversial. And just to put a fine point on it before transitioning to the metabolic origins, about 2 or 3 years ago, they found out that the very first published papers that implicated plaque as a cause of Alzheimer's disease were based on fabricated data. So the scientists who published those first reports that led to the entire theory that Alzheimer's disease is plaque-based were called out as fraudulent, and indeed, it was fabricated. So the entire idea of studies to try to determine how do plaques cause Alzheimer's